Well, hi there, and welcome to PDX Garden Home. It's mid-morning here. It's a beautiful fall day. It's been nice and sunny. I'm actually kind of looking at the garden to see if the plants are doing okay water-wise, because it's been cold. What I feel is unusually cold for fall. I mean, it's been like, 50s in the day and then getting down to below 30s on some of the evenings, which is not something I expected this soon. We just crossed over at the end of October to the beginning of November here. So yeah, it seems like it's been unseasonably cold, but it's been dry. So it really hasn't rained that much. And so, sometimes when it's this cold, you assume that the plants, you don't think about the water. You stop watering and you assume that the plants are good to go, but it can be cold and very dry, and then the plants can actually be getting dehydrated, not getting enough water at the same time. So that's what I'm looking for out here today, just kind of checking it out. But everything looks okay. I think we may have had some sprinkles last week that have kept everything fine. And then, of course, with the cooler weather, the water doesn't evaporate or just go away that quickly. So yeah, I think we're doing well. Glad you can join me today, and we're gonna do a few things in the garden that I think you'll appreciate. So I'll get to it. In this episode, we're going to be tackling the fall bulbs. Specifically, we're going to be planting tulips in these wine barrel planters. Then we're going to start cleaning up the tomato beds. We're going to cut the tomatoes down to the ground, throw out the branches, and start getting these beds ready for a fall mulching. Finally, we're going to check out the greenhouse in November. What's going on in the cold of fall here in Portland in the greenhouse? Well, you'll have to check it out in this video. All right, let's get to it. Well, it's tulip planting time. Perhaps some might think past tulip planting time, but I think we still have a window here in Portland. It's supposed to be, you plant in kind of October-ish. It's just beginning in November here. So I think it'll be fine. I think I did it a little bit later last year and it did fine as well. There's a host of fall bulbs that you plant in the fall for them to come up in the spring. I've seen a lot of comments. Actually, I was looking for bulbs to buy on Amazon, and then I saw a lot of the comments in people who were like buying bulbs, fall bulb, or things that you would plant in the fall, and they would be buying like a tulip, and they would be buying it in, say, February and planting it, and then wondering why it didn't actually come up in March or April. And typically that doesn't work. Typically you've got to plant your bulbs now in the fall for them to be able to come up in the March, April timeframe. And so, yeah, that's what we're out here doing today. We're going to be doing it in these wine barrel planters here, which I use to kind of break up the garden a bit, and then also kind of is where we put our decorative flowers. The other thing interesting about tulips that I learned between last year and this year that I didn't know, or I didn't have an appreciation for, is that while they technically are perennial and they may or may not, they may come back a bit, they actually are not. They never really come back as vigorously, at least not in our area. They don't come back as vigorously as they originally came up. So if you're serious about your tulips, you actually plant new bulbs every year, which I didn't appreciate that, but I thought I was making an investment last year that would then just last for years. And it is we have a bunch in these, we have a bunch from last year still in these pots, and I do expect some of the ones from last year will come up, but they won't fill the pots like they did last year. So if I want to fill the pots like I did last year, I have to reinvest. And, I thought about that for a little bit in terms of, gee, do I want to go to the expense of reinvesting every year? But heck, we like the tulips. They look great, and they are kind of that first major thing that hits our garden in the spring. And so, yeah, it's definitely worth it for me. So we bought a bunch of these in bulk, and like I said, it's not just tulips. There's other kinds of daffodils, other kinds of fall bulbs that you could be planting right now.
Earlier, which I don't have a video on here, I actually planted out the garlic, and so same thing, same time frame, and I planted out garlic in our garden beds, and so those will come up, and they will be nice and vigorous in the spring, but they probably won't be ready to harvest until July-ish of next year. Okay, well, I'm gonna kind of get into these beds here. So the other tricky thing for us is because I'm growing kind of year-round in the flowers here, we still have good things going on in here, and so I'm kind of going to be digging down in and around it so that I can kind of keep what's in there on the surface. And so you can do that. I mean, in the ideal scenario, you would have this kind of breathing space where I just didn't have anything growing in the pot right now, and you could plant the pot in layers. So you could I could empty the pot and basically put tulips in the bottom, then put a layer of dirt, and then maybe put like daffodils in, and then put a layer of dirt, and then I could plant some of these that we see here, like the Alyssium and the grass and the different flowers that I have in here. We could just plant those on the surface, and that would all be fine. And I think a lot of times we think, oh, you know, will the tulips make it up through all that? They absolutely will, so you don't have to worry about that. But the problem I have now is I don't want to kill. This stuff is looking nice for the fall. You know, not a lot, there's not a ton that looks great in the garden for the fall here in the design that I had or the work that I've done on it. I haven't kept everything looking nice, but when I have something like this that looks nice, I kind of don't want to kill it, but I also want to get my tulips in there. So yeah, you're going to see live my efforts in going about that and seeing how we do it. Another flower that we have in here now is the Hollyhock, which has just been beautiful this year, but I believe this is a biennial. So if I'm right about that, because we planted these actually not last year, but the year before, and they didn't flower the year before. And so if I understand this correctly, and I guess we'll see if I'm right when we look at the garden next year, but if I understand this correctly, this plant won't actually flower next year because it only flowers every other year. And I've been thinking about it this year, even though it's flowered, these big tall hollyhocks that end up in that are in these pots, I'm not sure that's the best place for them because they flop over unless I want to stake them and create certain height in these pots, which I'm not necessarily sure I want to do. I may ultimately decide to move this, but I'm not committed to moving it right now, so I'm just going to work around it today, and then maybe you'll see me move it in a later video, later segment or episode. All right, well, I'm sticking to, in these pots here, I'm going to stick to the color, to kind of purple color, purple and well, purple, I guess. I'm going to stick to kind of purple type colors for the tulips in here. I've got some red and yellow tulips, but I'm going to put those in some of the other borders that we have. And you really, like, to make a great show, you really want to have kind of a lot of tulips in concentration. So, I mean, when you look at this bag here, I've got a lot of tulips here, but I think I might actually use this entire bag in that one pot. Maybe not. I think if I'm, well, let's see it. Let me see how many bags I have to think about this. Got, let's see, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I think maybe to spread it out, maybe I'll use a half bag. But point being, you actually can put quite a lot in a small area, which I think kind of creates a better show than kind of just putting like one in each pot. Having kind of a good cluster in each area that you plant your tulips, whether it's in a pot or in a bed somewhere, kind of having a bunch together, I think kind of produces the better show for spring. Okay, so you can plant your tulips pretty deep. I could actually go deeper than this knife, but I don't need to. So I'm actually gonna plant the depth of the knife that I have. So makes it easy for the tools that I'm using and everything. And then the other thing to know, I've been here, I've done this one wrong before, is that you want to plant the tulip with the pointy end up. You know, if I plant this way, it might still work out, but I'm kind of creating problems for it, right? Because it wants to grow that direction. So I'm going to plant it with the pointy end up. The roots should come out of this end here. Just kind of like an onion or a garlic, right? And kind of similar. All right. So I'm going to find a space here and as I'm doing this, I very well may discover some grass or weeds or things that don't need to be in here, so I'm just pulling some of that out. We have a ton of pine needles everywhere right now because it's just been very windy. So we've got a lot of these kind of cedar and pine trees that produce these cedar trees that produce these needles, but they don't usually end up over here. But along with being cold, it's been incredibly windy here in Portland. So that's what we're dealing with. All right, I'm gonna go right down in there. So I'm gonna create my spot there, and I'm gonna drop that all the way down in. There we go, and that'll do it. Now you can get special tools just for digging in the ground to plant bulbs. You see those bulb planters. You can also get tools that attach to, I have one of those where you attach to your electric drill or your battery operated drill, and then you come out and you drill your holes. But yeah, I don't have a particular need for that, because as you can see, I can, especially in the pot here, I can get down in here as deep as I need to with my knife here. So it'd kind of be overkill to bring the drill out for this activity. I'm just carefully kind of finding the space I can find without disrupting too much. I am certainly disrupting some of the roots of things, and this is potting soil that's in here, so it's very soft and easy to kind of dig into. So the way I'm doing it, certainly not scientific or not even really well thought out ahead of time, as I'm kind of just doing it in concentric circles here. So I just kind of circled around that way, and then I'm gonna go back the other way, kind of one layer. Okay, so to do it over here, I'm really gonna have to, get into the, I think you call this Elysium, and I think I'm gonna have to kind of dig into it a bit to get my tulip in there. There we go. This is going a little bit better than I thought it would. I thought I'd have a hard time finding entry points in between these existing flowers, but these have a lot of foliage, but actually I can get in and around their root system okay. They're kind of, well, I say that now, but I guess we'll see in a week if they suddenly die off. And I might realize that I kind of disturbed their roots. All right, I'm gonna do one more here, and then I'm gonna call it good for this. For this barrel, and move on to the next one. Okay. All right, well, we'll see in the spring how that turns out. I'm gonna do something similar over here, although this one has some more bare areas to it. This has the same grass, decorative grass, the hollyhock, and then around here is a plant called, again, I say these plants, I use the wrong name for these plants, or I just pronounce them wrong, but this is I think it's called Galadria or Galadria, something like that. It produces these nice kind of smaller sunflowerish looking red and yellow flowers. It is perennial. That is from last year, and it grew and it bloomed well over the summer, and it'll come back and bloom again next year. So I don't want to kill it, but it is kind of more of the surface flower, so I should be able to kind of get my bulbs down in there if I can do it right. So I think I'll take a similar approach to what I did in the last one. I'll kind of circle close to the grass, to the decorative grass, and then work out from there. Yeah, there's definitely more roots that I'm kind of pushing through here than in the other. All right, well, here's to hoping that I didn't aggravate the existing plants too much to get those tulips in for spring, but we're definitely going to appreciate it come March and April. And I will, yeah, the process is similar for other bulbs. So we've got tulips, we've got some daffodils, we've got some that are called muscari, which are kind of a smaller bulb that we use kind of to fill out, kind of look like a blanket in a bed in the spring. And then we also have some crocus, which are smaller kind of bulbs, sort of in the tulip family, that they come out earlier in the late winter, earlier spring than the tulips do. So they give you that first flash of color. So all those different kinds of bulbs to plant, that's what I'll be doing over the next couple of weeks around the garden. But you know, there's the process is very similar to what we did here. We'll be doing it in these barrels and in our pots and planters and in some of our beds where we grow flowers. Well, that's it for this segment. I'll see you guys in the next one. Hello. It's unfortunately that time to go ahead and take the tomato plants down. I mean, they would probably survive longer, but we're having below 30-degree nights here in Portland. And so with that kind of temperature, things are just, you can see that things are starting to get killed with cold damage, which is actually a little bit unusual. I mean, what I usually face in October into November with the tomato plants, and some years, mind you, these tomato plants can kind of go to mid-November and maybe a little bit later, because we don't get that cold of temperatures at night yet. So in Portland, having those cold temperatures kind of in late October, as we've had, is a little bit unusual for me. But that being said, it's also unusual for us to have cold damage on or frost damage on the plants, because usually what happens is it's so rainy and wet that they just get washed out, essentially. There's more damage and things just done by the sheer rain. But in the last week and a half or 2 weeks almost, we really haven't had that much rain. We've had just a lot of, just a ton of dry cold, and it's taking its wear on the plants. So bottom line, there's really nothing left to save with these plants. One thing that I did earlier that you don't see here is that these plants did have some green tomatoes on them, and they or some kind of half-ripe tomatoes, and I came along and I clipped those tomatoes off in branches, put them in trays, and stuck them in the greenhouse. So that's already been done on this bed, and so now it's time for me to just take the tomato plants out. So I'm going to do something different than what I've done in the past in terms of taking the tomato plants out. In the past, I would literally pull up the entire root ball, but I've been working or developing my knowledge and skills of what they call the no-dig method and no-till method in your garden beds. And I'm going to try this year just cutting them down to the base, so not literally digging the root ball out. And the idea, as I understand it, is that you're kind of leaving the root ball to just rot in place, and that helps feed the microbes and the bugs and things that are actually good for your garden. So that's what I'm up to here. We'll also pull out these stakes and put them put them in storage to use for next year. We've used these same stakes for several years now, so they're great. Anytime I can get my hands on tall bamboo stakes for the garden, I'm happy. And I'm just cutting. The only reason I'm cutting these in some pieces is because they're tied to the stakes, and so I'm basically cutting them where they're tied, cutting them off, and then the smaller pieces are just easier for the compost. I know some people don't compost. They'll say, well, they shouldn't compost some of this because in this state they're getting diseases and things, and then maybe that's carrying over to the next year's garden. Maybe so, but I guess I've never really experienced it. I mean, we don't really get, I compost it and year after year, and we really never had kind of serious problems with blight or other kinds of tomato problems until the end, until they're ready to come out anyway. So so that's that. I'm just pulling there's some grass on the edge of the bed here that's kind of growing over that I'm going to pull out of my way just while I'm here anyway. Well, there we go. Has that ever happened to you when you're gardening? You start with one project that's in front of you, but then there's like all this other stuff around you that you see that you end up getting into and doing. Like, if I'm not careful before I'm done, I'm going to start deadheading all the marigolds that are here too at the same time. So that's often how it rolls for me. Okay, so what I'm doing here is just cutting the plant off at the base. I'm going into the dirt a little bit. But again, I'm not trying to pull out the root ball. I'm just cutting it off at the base there with my clippers. And I'm just going to leave the rest in there and see if that's okay in this coming year's garden. I have peppers in this bed as well. They're coming out too at the same time, so I'm going to do the same thing with this pepper plant here. I'm going to go into the dirt a little bit there, go into the base, snip it off, throw it away, and that's it. I'm not going to try to pull out the root ball or anything like that the way I would have in prior years. Like, see, I'm deadheading. I don't know if these marigolds seem to be surviving the cold weather a bit, but they're probably on their last legs as well, but I'll leave them in for now. They're not totally dead. They're still providing some color to the fall garden here, so I'll leave them in. Okay, I'm gonna pull my stake out. Well, that's longer than I thought. I was earlier today, I was looking at these stakes and I thought, well, I think maybe I have them about 6 inches into the ground, but it looks like I'm closer to almost a foot, maybe 8 to 10 inches, maybe a foot in there. I'm just gonna throw that off to the side. I'll collect it later. Okay, same thing on this one. I'm gonna, whoa, falling over here. I'm gonna cut these off where the tye-ons are. Pull it on my stake, get that out of the way. And come in here to the plant itself and go into the dirt a little bit and cut it off. You know, pull some of these plastic tags out and put them in my pocket. Hopefully they'll stay for next year. That's kind of a tangent, but I think I bought these plastic tags. They were really cheap. I think there's some kind of recycled, like they could recycle them from yogurt cups or something. Yeah, they don't really last the way I'd like. I bought them on Amazon. They were really cheap. I mean, it's fine. They've served their purpose. But they only last 1 to 2 years. Many of them end up they're very brittle after they get out here, so they break off and then don't become as useful. And I've had others in the past that were a little stronger that would last for years. Of course, there's a push worldwide with gardeners to use less plastic, and I can be on board with that. I just wasn't when I got these. Didn't think that part through. Okay. There we go. This. All right. Well, I'm going to continue down this row here. You can see we've got a lot of work cut out for us to get this all cleaned up, and then this will go in the compost. We'll have a clean bed. Once the marigolds have died back and we're done with those, then we'll come in and we'll refill this bed with more compost. We'll use our own compost that we've created. We've seen our compost, we've had big compost piles this year, so we actually have a lot of extra compost that we've created. And I mean, you can see this bed was full all the way up to the top of these boards at the beginning of the season. You can see where it is now. So we're gonna fill it up with our compost. That'll use a lot of our compost. And then what we have on top here, we generally buy some additional compost from that looks nice, essentially, just mainly for the looks. We use Grimm's Fuels compost here in their garden mulch here in the Portland, Oregon area. And so we'll buy that and we'll use it as a top dressing over the top of ours. So we're basically using ours as fill and then using their nice looking compost as kind of the top dressing to keep the garden looking nice and beautiful in the spring. Okay, well, that's what we're gonna get on to, and I'll see you all in another segment. Well, one of the nice things about having a greenhouse is when the weather is nice and cold like this, I shouldn't say nice and cold, when the weather's cold out there, but it is sunny outside, it keeps the greenhouse relatively warmer and pleasant for still being able to do some gardening activities. So yeah, this is a real luxury that I definitely appreciate. It is, I'm working right now on potting up some salvias, and that's kind of what you see going on here in the greenhouse is I've potted up, or we've planted up a bunch of perennial plants that we're working on and hoping to overwinter and then have available for the garden in the spring. And in particular, kind of what we've filled out most of the greenhouse with right now, it's just the very beginning of November, and what you see filling out most of the greenhouse right now are shade perennials. So we had a lot of plugs that we purchased. Plugs are kind of the little plants in what you might call a plug, a little soil plug with very little plant in it, and we've potted those up into bigger pots, either 5-inch pots or 1-gallon pots, and then and we have things like some begonias, for example, and these are shade plants, and we have a woodland area, a shaded area in the garden that I really haven't put a lot of plants in or put a lot of time into yet here at PDX Garden Home. So that's the plan, is we've got all these shade plants. We're gonna have a lot of fun in the next growing season, the next gardening season next year, kind of getting these out there and really kind of filling out that woodland garden more. And I think we're going to have lots of extras too that we're hoping we can maybe sell at the farmer's market as well. So that's some of the plans that we have going on. This is an unheated greenhouse, so on a sunny day like this, it makes it reasonably warm in here to play. But at night, it still gets pretty cold. So if it's getting below 30 degrees outside, I think we're probably only 3 to 4 degrees at most higher inside the greenhouse. So if it's 30 degrees outside, it's probably about 34, 35 degrees inside. And so that's still pretty cold for a lot of plants. So it's not like we can't really grow a tomato plant in here during the winter, for example, unless we were to do something to kind of heat the greenhouse. But there's a lot more to that, right? You got to have the heater, the power and the heater and all that, but then you also have to have probably better insulation than we have to really make use of having that heat in there. So we haven't done that. I did try doing a heater. I did try to insulate things with some extra plastic around openings and doorways and windows last year. Did try to have a heater in here. I was never convinced that it really did that much. So this year I'm going to try to just go without it and kind of see where that leaves us for the season. And you can kind of see we've got some basil plants in here. So we've had, and you can kind of see they're not doing great anymore. They were doing really great a couple weeks ago, but with the really cold weather we've had, that's really kind of attacking the plant at this point. It's starting to wilt a bit. It's otherwise fertilized. It's got good soil in there. It otherwise would be pretty happy if it wasn't so cold, but it survived. I mean, it didn't get totally killed by frost, so that kind of gives you an indication of how the greenhouse kind of can help you maybe keep something going. But if it's an unheated greenhouse, there's still limitations to how far you're going to be able to go with that. Growing our perennials, potting up. I mean, I've got a lot of things that are in these cell trays here. You can see the roots coming out the bottom. So this is salvias, and so I mean they're seriously ready to be potted up, right? So that's the task at hand, to get them in bigger pots so that they can grow on and be ready for spring. I've been fertilizing about once a week. I have a slow release fertilizer, the Osmocote type fertilizer in the pots with the plants right now. But that Osmocote fertilizer is primarily activated by heat, right? Which makes sense, because it's basically that Osmocote fertilizer will basically activate, and then it will create more when it's growing time, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is the heat is when there's more heat, there's an indication that it's time for the plant to grow, which kind of releases more of that slow release fertilizer. But when it's cold like this, I expect a lot of that fertilizer isn't being released. So to keep the plant actually getting some kind of fertilizer nutrients, I also give it another liquid fertilizer on a weekly basis or so. I'm not going to do it this week though, because the plants are already nice and moist, and because it's so cold, I don't really want to drench the plants with more water right now. So I'm just going to lay off the fertilizer for this week. Okay, so yeah, I'll kind of show you what I'm doing here to pot up the salvia. So I love these little tools here. I originally got some little shovels like this from a Japanese dollar store in Seattle one year, and it was one of the best tools that I had. And then of course, that was 6-7 years ago, and so those tools either get lost or broken over time or whatever. And so once I realized these things exist, then I've been ordering them on Amazon. So this one was ordered on Amazon, and yeah, it's great, nice. It's perfect for this particular job. And then when I take these plants out of the cell trays, I can use the little shovel. So sometimes I do. It depends. If I can just squeeze the bottom of the cell tray, and then the plant will come easily out. That's the easiest way to go. I kind of massage the ends a little bit so the roots can kind of think about spreading out, growing more there. And then I'm going to drop it in the little hole that I created and surround that a bit. And then it's good to go. And so the alternative is sometimes the plant doesn't come very easily from just squeezing it. So the other thing that's nice about this shovel is that it's the perfect size for getting into the sides of the cell tray here. So I can kind of go into the sides there to kind of separate the plug. This is an example of what I was talking when I used the word plug earlier. That's an example. So I can separate the plug from the plastic there and get underneath there and lever it out. And that's that. Let me massage that a little bit. Let me dig my hole here. Drop that in. And now we should be good to have a really nice and beautiful salvia plant for spring. Okay, well, I want to thank you for joining me again here at PDX Garden Home this week, and we're going to keep all the way through the fall and the winter. We're going to keep making videos. It might be that more of them are here in the greenhouse for the next few months. More videos in the greenhouse, maybe some in our potting shed. But I still get out there when it's dry. We still get out there and do some things too. So So if don't think that the garden's over just because it's gotten cold and it's turning fall and winter. We'll still be doing stuff, and please check back with the channel. And if you're enjoying the videos and what we're doing here, please tell your friends and family about it and hit that subscribe button below. All right, take care now. I'll see you guys in the next episode.